Welcome to Coast Vue, the show that every single day celebrates the men and women who are making coastal Mississippi such a great place to live, work, and play. One of those people is actually Greg Cronin, who's the current chairman of the board for Coastal Mississippi Tourism and the Gulf Coast president for Citizens Bank, and we'll have him in the second half of the show. Sort of regret that we had to find a time where we could get together, and that was it. But I regret that we didn't spend a whole hour with Greg, or we will spend a whole hour with Greg. But we'll have a great conversation in the second half of the show, and this will be one of many conversations we'll have with Greg. So look forward to that in the second half of the show. But it's Friday, and it's Jeff Duncan Day here on Coast Vue. Jeff Duncan is a columnist for NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune, a longtime friend, has been on the show for nearly 3 years. And anyway, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing terrific, Ricky. It's the season's over, and so we all kind of take a deep breath. But in the NFL, as you know, it never ends. I mean, there's almost as much news in the off season these days as there is during the season. If I look at the columns you've written, the columns your team has written, the number of stories coming out of NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune. By the way, people haven't signed up for your morning newsletter. I highly recommend it if you're a Saints fan, Pelicans fan. I would urge you to do the same thing. But what's interesting, we've got a swirl of injuries. You've got all this reflection on last year and what the plays need to be. You see that we've essentially handed Philadelphia a top 10 pick, and then I would say the biggest story, which is interesting because I guess directly related to how the Saints are going to perform in the upcoming draft, is what you guys continue to refer to as the Sean Payton sweepstakes. But I mean, that's the big story of the offseason so far. And what we're going to get in return is going to be important. Some people think we're going to get the ranch, but you recently wrote a column that said, don't expect the ranch. But give us the latest. Yeah, it's funny. I agree with you. It feels like that's almost the dominant storyline in New Orleans, and Sean Payton's been gone for a year now. But it directly impacts the Saints because Sean Payton's still under contract. The Saints have his rights for 2 more years. So anywhere he chooses to go, if he does elect to take a coaching job, there'll have to be compensation worked out between that new organization and the New Orleans Saints. So it does directly impact the Saints. We've seen historical precedent in this matter with John Gruden going from the Raiders to the Bucks, and Bruce Arians going to the Bucks over the years. We've seen it with Herm Edwards, and of course, famously back in the day with Bill Parcells and Bill Belichick and the Patriots and Jets. What a mess that was. So it's not unheard of for a coach to do this, but the historical precedent doesn't lend much insight into what the compensation will be. I think that's what everybody's curious about. Will the Saints get a first-round draft pick? Will they get multiple first-round draft picks? Will they get a second and a first? There's really no way to know. But what I think is going in the Saints' favor right now is the fact that multiple teams have already reached out to request permission to talk to Sean Payton. And those 3 teams are the Arizona Cardinals, Denver Broncos, and Houston Texans. So you got at least 3 teams interested. That doesn't mean they're going to offer him the job, but they've at least expressed interest. And I think the best scenario for the Saints is if he does elect to go to a team, that there are multiple teams interested in him, because that could create a little leverage for Mickey Loomis to get the best deal possible.
I thought you guys at NOLA.com and Times-Picayune did a great job of sharing the betting lines on the coaches that are being considered for all 3 teams. And I was actually blown away with how many potential head coach candidates are in play. It's a pretty big field, isn't it?
Yeah, look, Sean Payton is a generational coach. We saw what he did here, and there's going to be interest in him. I don't know necessarily if he's going to take a job. There's a lot of interest right now, but I'd say right now, if I had to guess, I would say I'd lean toward him not taking a job and sitting out another year. But, no one really knows. I don't even think Sean knows right now. I think he's going to go visit with these teams. He can't go anywhere until the 17th. The league's mandated no coaching interviews on site until the 17th. So he's still got a few days before he gets out. But you never know. Look, we've all been to job interviews where we didn't think we were going to take it, and you get in the building, you meet the right people, they're persuasive, and you change your mind. And so I would not rule out anything with Sean Payton. I think he's done a lot of homework. I know he's done a lot of homework on these openings, but I don't think it's necessarily tied to the current roster or the quarterback that's on the team. I don't think that's high on the priority list. I think it's more important to him right now to find a place where he thinks he can win long term, have sustained success. And what that means is you've got functional leadership in the building, functional ownership, functional management, people around you. That's more important to him right now than who's the starting quarterback on that roster.
Yeah, the culture of the organization. Yeah, and for all the challenges the Saints had with preceding Tom Benson's death, and then all of that swirled. You led that story as it related to Rita Benson and that situation. But what that did in the wake of all of that, what that did is actually solidify the management and ownership and for the time while Sean was there, the coaching staff, and that's enviable, isn't it? That setup that was here, that's still here at the Saints, is an enviable sort of setup culturally for a head coach, isn't it?
Yeah, and look, I think the Saints are a great example. Sean Payton came here when it looked dysfunctional on the outside, but actually in a lot of ways it was very functional. You had a strong management team and ownership that allowed the coaches and football people to do their jobs. I mean, Tom Benson and Yale Benson, that's a strength of this organization, is they allow their people to do their jobs. They hire good people, let them work. And so from the outside, it might have looked dysfunctional, but to Sean Payton, it looked very functional. So I think that also could be true of some of these other jobs. I think the only thing I would say about the quarterback is I don't think Sean would go somewhere where there's a bad quarterback situation already in place and one that's not really that he could get out of. In other words, I think that would be an impediment to him going somewhere. But if it's wide open, say the Houston Texans, who really have a wide open roster and a young quarterback who they could move on from in Davis Mills, or Carolina, which has an open spot, I think those are not, just because there's not a quarterback answer there on the roster, I think he almost would look at that as a benefit more than a disadvantage.
Yeah, Denver, even though Denver, as you and I talked about in past shows, even though Denver may back up the Brinks truck to try to get Sean Payton, the situation around Wilson is just unattainable, at least in the short term. And so we'll see. We'll see how that all plays out. A lot of reflection. You've written about it. Your team has written about it. This final game of the season, in some respects, I'm kind of glad they didn't win because, the truth is the season was kind of a dud. And they ended on a dud. And you guys have not pulled any punches in pointing that out, have you?
No, look, I think you make a great point. I totally agree with you. I felt like the late winning streak was almost masking how bad the team was. I think throughout the year, because they were in such a bad division, the NFC South, and it allowed them to maintain their playoff hopes. On one hand, it's great because you're still playing relevant games and you still got a chance. But on the other hand, I think there was a little denial going on within the building of just how far this team's got to go. As I pointed out in my column, this team is closer to the bottom of the league right now than they are to the top. And I think that reality needs to sink in. They cannot have denial in this offseason. They can't sugarcoat things. They tried to, and I understand why they did. They tried to maintain the status quo with the Sean Payton regime, and I don't think it worked. I guess what I would say the biggest issue I think going forward is really Dennis Allen now. He's had 1 year under his belt. He has to determine what the identity of this team is going to be, and I think we can see it, right? It's going to be a defensive-minded team. They're going to be conservative on offense. They're going to be a lot like the Baltimore Ravens, the old Jim Mora Saints. And I think to do that, you need to kind of find out offensively a different identity, because right now they brought Pete Carmichael back. They kept the same offensive system that Sean Payton was running. I'm not sure that's conducive or marries up with what the philosophy is Dennis Allen as a head coach. So I could see them overhauling the offensive staff, the quarterback, and finding something more conducive to playing that type of football going forward.
Well, Jeff, in my time, and I've mentioned this to you before, but my time as a CEO, if I look back, there in similar situations where you've got somewhat like a number two. Here's Pete Carmichael was the number two. He was he was a strong number two. He wasn't a number one. But in situations like that where you want to go, okay, at least he's a known commodity. It's better to know the devil you know than the devil you don't know. They put him in the job. The point is that when Pete Carmichael said he didn't want the job, when I had a number two that said they didn't want the job and I still promoted him, I usually regretted it. I mean, Pete knew that he didn't have the skill sets to do what he observed Sean Payton doing on a consistent basis. So I agree with you. I expect big changes in offensive leadership. And if they don't, man, it's going to be more of the same. When we come back, we can continue. We had some really terrible injuries on the offensive line. Liz Frank injuries. I mean, again, we've talked about that on a regular basis. But we've also had some stars emerge. We've got something to build this team around. It's not all lost, and the team at NOLA.com and Times-Picayune have done a good job of sort of parsing through it all to make it make sense to us. We'll continue the conversation with Jeff Duncan on the other side. Welcome back to Coast Vue. We have Jeff Duncan from NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune. And one of the things that I couldn't help but think about, Jeff, as we were finishing up that section, is that when you think about the flurry of activity around Sean Payton, you think about trying to maintain some of his culture here at the Saints while, becoming a defensive-minded game. It seems to me that the book you wrote on Sean Payton and Drew Brees probably needs to have a whole nother chapter to it.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think this post-Drew Brees, Sean Payton era is fascinating to watch. And historically, it's been very difficult to replace a Hall of Fame quarterbacks like that, first ballot Hall of Famers like Drew Brees. And then on top of that, you've got a coach that's probably going to be a Hall of Fame coach. That kind of leadership doesn't come along very often. And there's a transition in place. And Dennis Allen talked about that on Monday when we visited with him. He said, those quarterbacks like that don't grow on trees. And so I think the Saints are figuring all that out, what this post-Brees landscape, what that is like. And I think determining the identity of the franchise going forward under Dennis Allen, we saw kind of that play out in the second half of the season. And I think they need to do more of that this offseason. I think it's a critical offseason. I think they have to be very bold, very aggressive, very creative to get back in the mix. But there's reason for optimism. A lot of young players came on this year. They have a lot of work to do in free agency. They have to be creative, I think. I think they will. Kai Harley and Mickey Loomis are terrific at crunching those numbers. But it's going to be a challenge because they're over the cap, and they've got 26 unrestricted free agents, Ricky, including a lot of key guys on this roster that I think they want back, but there's going to be a market for their services.
Well, you think about Chris Olave. What a great choice he was. I mean, he set a record for rookie. Even did better than Marcus Colton and Michael. My mind went blank. Thomas, of course. But what a season he had, and he's still not satisfied, is he?
No, look, he needs to get stronger. I mean, we saw that in the Carolina game. I mean, that was the knock on him coming out of Ohio State. He's a very slight guy. He's not big. He's not the kind of guy that's going to go over the middle and make contested catches. That's not his game. He's a polished, smooth route runner and very advanced for his age. So, yeah, they hit a home run with Chris Olave, and I think his quick development, along with the out-of-nowhere emergence of Rashid Shaheed. I mean, no one even knew who this guy was in training camp, and now he's the number 2 receiver on the team. I think those two guys, the fact that they're both on rookie contracts, allows the Saints to consider moving on from Michael Thomas. And I think they will here in March, either release him or trade him because they feel good about their receiver position. And I don't think you could have said that a year ago.
I mean, and other receivers emerged. I mean, ones we weren't sure about. I mean, there was a lot to look at there that was very positive for the future, wasn't there?
Well, I mean, tight end Juwan Johnson, who's a former receiver who got converted to tight end, along with Adam Troutman, and you have to throw Taysom Hill into that mix as just a offensive playmaker. Those are the guys I expect all back. Those five for sure. I think Traquan Smith is still valuable to this team because of the way he blocks. But they need another running back to go with Alvin Kamara. I think Eno Benjamin opened some eyes. The young guy they brought in from Houston, who was cut by Arizona earlier this year. I think he's got a chance to stick on the roster. But what they really need, in my opinion, is a bigger physical back to go with Alvin Kamara. If they're going to be this physical team, they can't always just run Taysom Hill. They need another back, I think, to carry the load, especially with Alvin as he's getting up in age, and the fact that he's probably going to serve a suspension next year. A running back, to me, is the number one need on offense.
Well, frankly, the way they're pursuing that case in Las Vegas, a suspension is what he should hope for.
Right.
Hopefully that case doesn't end up in jail time. What's your read on it these days?
I haven't heard much new on it, to be honest with you. But, I mean, everyone I've talked to thinks he definitely will be suspended. There's no doubt it's going to be a lengthy suspension. And there are some legal experts, some lawyers I've talked to that think he will serve jail time. I think it's all going to come down to the DA in Clark County, how much he wants to pursue this. But I've also heard other opinions that say they think because his record in the past has been clean, that he'll be okay. But I think it's a dangerous situation for the Saints, and they have to have a backup plan. I know they know that.
The problem with that case is going to be when it starts to get focused on, then that video, the video is something that's going to be incredibly damning. It's going to be showed millions of times. I mean, it's just going to be a bad moment for him. And frankly, it's really unfortunate because, as you know, Alvin Kamara's history with the Saints has been someone who's not a troublemaker, who's kind of an inspiring, philosophical kind of guy, very smart. And he just got himself in that moment at that time at the Pro Bowl, surrounded by people. And it just shows you that at any moment, man, one bad decision can take you down a rabbit hole that you can't get out of.
Yeah, what our parents all taught us, right? Very little good happens after midnight. And I think this is a prime example of it. And he's paying a really costly price because of it.
We talked about Lisfranc injuries last week. Man, oh man, 2 of them on the offensive line. But we've watched, of course, with Taysom Hill, you can recover. It's a little bit tougher injury to recover from, even after you have the surgery, for an offensive lineman. That creates a lot of doubt, doesn't it?
Well, I'd say they'll be okay. I mean, I would think long term that's something that we have to worry about. I think the fact that you got the whole offseason now to work on it, but it's certainly a setback for a young player like Trevor Penning, who already missed more than half the season with a toe injury. That really, derailed his progress and his learning curve. And then now he's not going to be with the team all off season again while he's rehabbing his foot. So yes, it's definitely a setback for the team. I mean, he showed great flashes of dominant play, especially in the run game at left tackle. Dennis Allen praised him on Monday. He's going to be the starting left tackle next year unless there's something wrong with his foot going forward. I don't anticipate that, but he's got a ways to go. But you can see the mold, the clay is there. It's good clay for the offensive line coaches to mold. I mean, he's a big, physical, dominant player, a great athlete, and I think the sky is the limit for him. Now, I think the Saints, we talked about getting creative in the offseason. I wouldn't be surprised if they had to make a tough decision with Andres Pete, who's been kind of a core guy there at left guard for a long time. His contract's one of those ones they're going to have to take a hard look at. If they were to release Andres Pete, that creates a hole at the guard position. Cesar Ruiz, I think, showed improvement at right guard. But I think guard could be a spot that this team has to address in the offseason.
You know what's interesting? I think about Trevor Penning. First of all, you said this before the season started, that when you're in the presence of Trevor Penning, he's just this big hulk of a man. I mean, and then you saw it. I mean, I saw it when other people were standing next to him. First of all, the guy is just absolutely a giant, isn't he?
Yeah, and I don't know if you saw the video of him in that game, but he threw another human being off the field. He threw him threw him away like a rag doll. It was crazy to watch. I mean, he's a force out there. Now, he got beat on an inside move on a pass rush that led to a key third down incompletion by Andy Dalton. That's where the Saints in that game were awful. Andy Dalton was 1 of 7 on third down, and the one he completed went for 1 yard on a 3rd and 2. So that was really not good. But that's an area he's got to get better at, pass blocking. I mean, he's going to get beat a lot doing that.
When I think about Zion Williamson from the Pelicans and the rehab he had to go through with his foot, and he came back this guy that was just in shape and bulked up and ready to tackle the season. So if there's a sort of a silver lining in that injury for Trevor Penning, is he's just not going to just rehab his foot. He's going to work to get in shape. It's going to really create a very regimented, opportunity for him during the offseason to come back ready to, rip and roar physically. And so, maybe there's a silver lining in there somewhere.
The other thing, and this is a little off subject, but, I didn't know this. None of us knew this at the game, Ricky, but Zach Streif revealed it this week on the WWL radio that before the game, Calvin Throckmorton was slated to start at right guard, and he, going through his pregame warm-ups, hurt his back, just flukishly hurt his back. And this is after the inactives list had been designated, so they were stuck with him. He couldn't go in the game. They had to play Josh Andrews at right guard. He found that out 30 minutes before the game. He was starting at right guard. Then Penning got hurt on the last series, so they were down to starting Lewis Kidd at left tackle, a rookie undrafted free agent. That was the only 5 offensive linemen they had left on the roster. If one more would have gotten hurt, they'd had to put Adam Troutman out there at tight end to play offensive line. So that shows you how crazy things get sometimes in NFL games.
So much to focus on, so much to think about it, and this will be a dynamic off season. And I'm thrilled that we have Jeff Duncan to tap into to sort of get what's going on behind the scenes. It's been a pleasure to catch up with you, my friend.
Have a great weekend, Ricky. Talk to you next week, buddy.
You bet. When we come back, we have Greg Cronin. We'll look forward to having a chat with Greg here after this.